¿Qué onda amigos? ¿Cómo están? Bienvenidos a este nuevo episodio de su podcast ¿Qué te tomas? Yo soy Beto Rizzo, su podcast host. Esta semana me senté a platicar con Erick Galindo. Erick is an award-winning writer and podcast producer. Actually, Erick is the host and the producer of one of my favorite podcasts ever, Idolo, la balada de Chalino Sanchez. He also produces Wild and Out of the Shadows. He's written for the New York Times. He's written for the LA Times. He's written for a lot of different publications. And I'm a big fan of his work. And that's the reason I wanted to connect with him. In this episode, we talk about his upbringing. We talk about his experience working in DC as a journalist and a columnist, and how he became disillusioned of the U.S. Capitol because of his inequalities, and because in order to survive, you have to play a game that he wasn't really a big fan of. We talk about how he actually moved to live in his car, but he used that experience to travel across the U.S. and visit different national parks. We talk about then coming back home and reconnecting with his roots. Then finally learning how to ask for that help that eventually led him to the success that he's been able to achieve. So I think that's a key takeaway of his episode, learning how to ask for help and allowing ourselves to receive the support that we need from the people around us. So I hope that you enjoyed this episode. This episode is mostly in English. Avísenme qué les parece. Acuérdense de darle like y suscribirse anywhere where you're listening to your podcast. Cuídense y nos escuchamos el siguiente episodio. Erick, bienvenido a ¿Qué te tomas, carnal?
What's up, man? How you doing?
Good, man. We're ready. It's a beautiful Saturday morning here in the city of Sacramento. Where are you today? Are you in LA?
I'm in LA. Yeah, I'm in the East LA suburbs, little suburb called Whittier.
Y oye, Erick, what are you having for drinks this morning, man? ¿Qué te estás tomando?
Cafecito.
Nice. What do you use?
You know what? My preference, if I had my preference, it would be instant coffee. I love instant coffee because that's what I grew up drinking. That's what my parents drink. Today I used the French press just because I'm like, I don't know if this happens to you, but like, do your parents ever give you a bunch of stuff and then or people give you things and then you feel like you have to use it, like you don't want to waste it?
That's like, yes, and I'm trying to get over that, man. Like it's I don't know if I don't know if it's cultural. I don't know if it's like more like, Mexican or Latino, but
yeah,
it's I actually read this book. It's called ¿cómo se llama? It's about tidying up your house, Marie Kondo wrote it. It's like
Marie
this.
Kondo,
yeah,
and there's called,
this like really cool idea that she has is like when somebody gives you something, it's for it to like, it gives you meaning on the moment. It makes you feel good and it makes them feel good that they give it to you. But after that transaction is done, that's over. Like you fulfilled your part of the deal, which is being happy when you got it, and they fulfilled the part of the deal, which is being happy when they give it to you. But that's done. Like once you have it, you can do whatever you want with it, So
whoa, you're blowing. I've never read the Marie Kondo, but everybody talks about her. Well, that's that. Okay, I like that.
I love that idea, man, because we used to have more clutter here. My wife and I, mi esposa también es mexicana, and like we used to keep a lot of shit around.
Okay, well, that's a long way of saying my dad gave me a bunch of like Starbucks coffee, like the ground coffee bags, like a lot, like 12 of them, and my wife doesn't like it. Like she thinks it's too strong, It's like it's a dark roast, it's very strong. And like, who knows where my dad got it from, honestly, it might have fell off the truck somewhere. One of his compas gave it to him, so it might be like really old, whatever, but I am like, since she's not here or she's out of town right now, I'm like, I'm going to try to drink as much of this free coffee as possible so that it doesn't go to waste. Yeah. So this is what I'm doing. This is a KFC biscuit. From leftover from last night. So this is my bun. I honestly, I've been trying to eat less chucherías.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't buy pan dulce. Like I used to have. There was a few years ago. I basically was like, I lost my job, I lost my apartment, and I wound up basically living in my car. And eventually I moved it back in with my parents, and I was very embarrassed at first, and I was like so sad. I remember crying like my first night, like back there, and I was like, oh, I gotta get out of here. I'm gonna get out of here, and like I give myself a timeline. I'm gonna get out of here in 6 months. And then it was like the greatest thing because my parents were the greatest like roommates ever. Like they cook, they clean, they love you so much. And I got my dad put me on game, which is like every morning he would have cafecito in un birote like with butter, like my mom would toast
Mm-hmm.
the birote and the George Foreman grill, and she put the
Yeah.
butter on there. And so I was having that every fucking day, for like, I don't know, this was like 2016, maybe like 3 years, 4 years, something like that. Like, and then I was like, oh my God, so I had to like kick that habit. And now I will just have like bun every once in a while, but I
Yeah.
usually have like sourdough or like that like diet raisin bread, It's like very very low carb shit, and
Mm-hmm.
every once in a while I will have like, something nice like a chocolate croissant from the farmer's market or something like that. But last night um I didn't make dinner. My wife's out of town, and so I just, I ordered KFC for my father-in-law who lives with us. And
Nice.
this morning there was some biscuits left, and I was like, "Oh, nice." I didn't have any last night. Last night, puros tacos.
Sí,
Um,
vi que andabas en el Guadalajara, o it's like Guadalajara LA Film Festival, ¿no?
yeah, the Guadalajara LA Film Festival was this weekend or these past 3 days. So I was there, and then I was starving. I was like dying. I was dying. I was getting a headache because yesterday I was doing protein only.
Mm-hmm.
And I did intermittent fasting, so I didn't eat breakfast. All I had was lunch, and all I had for lunch was like some lean beef and a bunch of veggies.
Yeah.
So I'm at this festival, and I'm just like, oh my God, I got a headache. And then like it's beautiful. It's a beautiful event, but I was like, I'm gonna like sneak out. I'm gonna sneak out and get some
Yep.
tacos because like
You're like, hurry the fuck up with those speeches, man. Yeah, thank you, and let's
yeah, I'm
go.
like, great, amazing. But and I know they were gonna have like an after party with food, but I was like, it's not gonna be good. I mean, it's gonna be probably good, but it's gonna be like fancy good.
Yeah.
It's gonna be like, oh, like
Finger
some
food,
corp.
like,
Yeah, yeah. And I was like, I'm like, I rarely am out on a Friday night anymore, like in downtown LA, and there are so many good tacos in downtown LA. So I just dipped and I gave myself a little taco crawl. Yeah, well, if you ever come to LA, three spots I highly recommend: Los Dorados, Marisco Jalisco, Sonora Town. And so I had myself a little feast. So I did not have any of the KFC last night, but I had some this morning. That's a long story, but that's why I'm eating a KFC biscuit with my coffee today.
yeah, back it, man. I love it, dude. Like, I can tell that you're a storyteller just by telling me where the biscuit came from. I mean, we have a whole like
That's true.
journey, Odysseus kind of journey. ¿Ahí se llama, no, el vato Odysseus?
Oh, DCSE, CC. I think that's how you pronounce it, yeah.
Isn't that like the first hero's journey that there was? I don't know exactly where that came from, but that,
I think like Aristotle sort of kind of created the idea of the hero's journey. I think he did it after he had read a lot of the Greek myths. His book was called Poetics, and he kind of explains like he
yeah.
breaks down like the hero's journey, and then a bunch of other people like sort of coined the term hero's journey later. But I think it really all goes back to Aristotle. The simplest way I ever explain it is just like there's somebody whose life is normal,
Uh-huh.
and then something happens to them, and their life becomes a little bit different or a lot different, depending on like what kind of story you're telling. But essentially, they go through this journey where their life is changed, and at the end of the journey, they are sometimes very different, sometimes a little bit different, sometimes not different at all.
I actually like that the way you put it when you say it's someone that has a regular life and then something happens that alters that. I think I like that.
Yeah, Spider-Man. Spider-Man is the perfect one. He's a fucking nerd in high school, gets bit by a spider, has these superpowers, and then but he winds up not like not really understanding him. Then his mentor, his uncle dies,
Yeah,
right?
Uncle Ben.
Uncle
That's right.
Ben, and that turns him into a superhero essentially. And then at the end, he fights whoever he fights in the first one. I think the Green Goblin or something, and then he
Yeah.
kind of winds up becoming. At the end of it, he's like, "Well, now I'm your local neighborhood Spider-Man," which is to say, he's still a nerd, but now he's a nerd with superpowers. So he's a lot different, but he's still kind of the same guy, you know?
Were you big on comic reading growing up?
I was, man. Yeah. I had a huge collection of comic books and comic cards. Like, you remember the trading cards?
Vaguely. I didn't grow up here, man. So like, this is something that I'm trying to get accustomed to.
They were like baseball cards or like soccer cards, but they had like Wolverine on them. They were kind of like, did you guys have Pogs in Mexico? Or like, wait, what
When I
part of
was
Mexico were you in?
Jalisco.
Okay, Jalisco, okay.
So in Jalisco, usually most Mexican kids, we collect tazos, which is, like on the papitas, you would get like the
Yeah,
tazos that come out. It was more like that, I think, later in life, when I was like in sixth grade and I was able to afford a Yu-Gi-Oh deck. That's when I
don't know
got
what
more
Yu-Gi-Oh
into
is.
like the trading. It was more like gambling, dude. Like I have this whole piece of research where I go deep into gambling in Mexican culture because it's such a big part of what we are. When you think about the most family-friendly Mexican game, Loteria, involves putting in your
Gambling.
money in the middle.
Yeah, it's true.
¿Cómo se llama esa madre? La pirinola. You put it in, it's like pon uno, toma dos and shit. Like you're gambling. Y growing
That's
up in
true.
Mexico, tazos, like we used to gamble Yu-Gi-Oh cards, like even like canicas, man, like the marbles.
That's so cool though. I hadn't really thought about it, but you're right. Like a lot of Mexican, like my uncle taught me how to play poker, like on the way to Tijuana, like on the way to like we were driving from LA to his house in Tijuana, and in the car, I think I was like 5, and he was like teaching me how to play poker, and also like how to spot cheaters, how to like try to get an advantage. And I like to this day, like poker is like one of my favorite things to play, like because I learned it at such a young age.
I'm telling you, man, like I'm gonna tell you this, dude, like, because I think I've shared in the podcast before, but like I was an avid gambler, like I gambled a lot growing up. So I learned how to play cards, poker. So my dad, we used to hire workers to help us, work in Mexico. So my dad used to work here in the U.S., save his money, go back and try to make it as an agricultor, like growing corn or
Oh,
sugarcane or things like that. Next to our house, my uncle, who also lives in the U.S., he had a house that he bought but he never used. So we would borrow that house, let the workers stay there, and they would just hang out at night. It was right next door to my house. So I worked with them in the days, but at night, my parents wouldn't let me hang out with them. So I would sneak out and go play poker with them. They taught me how to play poker when I was like, I want to say like 9, 10, and I would play with grown-ass men and gamble, like 3, 4 pesos,
wow.
5. And I would beat their asses. I was a lucky kid. It was a big part of like growing up. So when I got married, I decided to stop because
Yeah.
I even like, I got into like counting cards and like really understanding like the game at the casinos. And I was like, you know what, man, it's taking too much
Dang.
time. I'm a married man now. I should start a podcast, Yeah,
That's
dude.
good. I like that. I feel you. I used to gamble a lot. There was a time period where all I did was like I didn't have a job. All I did was play Texas Hold'em like all over the country.
Really?
And yeah, I mean honestly, I was okay. I think I was very lucky. Like I've always been very lucky. I did that for like a year, mostly just so I could see like the country, like the US, like
Oh, you travel around.
yeah, because I was always afraid to leave like LA and like Mexico, LA. That's it. We would go Mexico, LA, and I felt comfortable in those spaces, but I really wanted to get comfortable like outside, I wanted to go and see places that like supposedly we're not supposed to be in, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
I decided to just like go, and I was able to travel all over the country and have a really nice like sort of at the time, what I thought was a nice life. Looking back, it was terrible. Like sleeping in my car, parking lots, going broke. But at the time, I thought it was like, oh my God, I'm living on the edge. I'm living this is like I'm Jack Kerouacking or whatever,
Yep.
like. And now looking back, I was like, damn, I'm so glad I'm not doing that anymore. Like
How long do you do that for?
I would do it off and on, but like the longest period where like I did it like nonstop was like a year. I think I did it. I think it was like I would travel. Yeah, it was like I was working in DC. I was working in DC as like a political columnist, and I had like this really interesting experience where I thought I wanted to be like a political columnist. Like I thought like that's the great job. Like you write about what happens and your opinion is so important and you get to tell people what you think about what's happening. And then I got like really lucky and I got to go to DC and like if you're gonna be a political columnist, like DC is the place, right? And I got really disillusioned like really fast by the incredible wealth disparity that I saw in DC. And
Preach,
I
man.
also just like it's like one of the most like it is the city where like they print money and there's so many people who don't have money who like are DC natives who are unhoused and also like the just like the idea that like there was just that money was really the only thing that mattered to both like to the people who are in power and also to the people who are like the advocacy groups, that are supposed to be
Yeah.
like fighting for Latino stuff. Like at the time, what I didn't really understand was like there's nuance. Like there is no like easy answer and everything. But when I was really young, I was like in my early 20s and I had like this, I was like such an idealist. And DC sort of cured me of that idealism. It made me a little bit more practical, which, when you grow up with like immigrant parents or you're an immigrant yourself, like being practical is already deep in your bones, you know? And so that made me really practical. But before I was like, oh, okay, I quit, I left this big job. I was gonna be a White House. I was gonna be in the White House pool. I was gonna be one of the first like Latinos in the White House pool. Which means you get to
Wow.
follow the president. You get to follow the president. You get to be on Air Force One. You get to do all this stuff. And I was like 20 something. It would have been a crazy job. It would have changed the trajectory of my life. Maybe if it gone well, who knows? I'd be like one of those people who writes books about like presidents, whatever, like biographies of like the Clinton White House or Obama. It was President Obama's. So I would have been the Obama White House. But I decided to leave. I got in my Grand Marquis, which was the car I drove at the time. It was a powder blue Grand Marquis, and I love that car so much. I just took off like and I drove across country and I played a lot of poker like that year and I think it was like a whole year where I was just kind of driving around like seeing places that I had never seen like
Were you on by
uh
yourself?
most of the time, yeah. Sometimes like I'd go pick up a friend, like I had one of my best friends, she's a photographer, so I'd pick her up and she'd shoot, photos and I would like sometimes like I'd sell a story or was like freelance journalist, but most of the time I was by myself, yeah, and it was cool. It was very formative to see so much of the country and see so many different types of people, like especially going through like the South, and like the South up until that point, like really I'd only known about the South through books and like history class, and a lot of that is like antebellum South, civil rights, and also like uh, you know, crazy things like a Confederacy of Dunces, or like
The I'm curious about this. So, you were in DC, man, and like, you were close to being, in the president's pool, like, following him around. And, something that has happened to me in my career, as you know, like I've been working in politics, for most of my career, really. And one of the biggest obstacles for me was understanding who I wanted to be within that space and how I
hmm
wanted to show myself around specific people, right? So like, picking and choosing parts of who I was that I thought would make the best Roberto or Beto for specific rooms. And I struggled with that for a while, man. Like it wasn't until recently that I decided, this is who I am. This is what I bring to the table. But I suffered, understanding that aspect because I've never been a part of it. Like I only on the peripherals and like watching documentaries and shit. Was that part of of your decision, not wanting to kind of like change who you were, or did you not fit in a way? So yeah, so it was a long question, but
no. I think that's a great question. I think like number one is like I'm a redheaded Mexican. Like I never fit in. Like that was a given. Like from birth. Like I just didn't fit in. I didn't fit into my own fam. Like my parents don't have red hair. My parents are they come from the ranchos. They don't look like an Irish leprechaun. Like they're very nice, good looking Mexican people. And um, so it was weird. I was always kind of the weird kid. I was always kind of, even for white people, redheads are rare. So I never quite fit in. So I'm sure that's part of it. I am not a like I don't. It's hard. I'm not introspective. Like I'm not a deep thinker. Like because I think I probably if I anytime I do get introspective, it cripples me to the point where I cannot function. I start thinking too much about stuff. So having grown up in a rough neighborhood, like I grew up like in the Compton area for most of my like formative childhood.
mhm.
And so I didn't really have like time to think too much. I was always like reacting or trying to survive. So I think I grew up without like these things where I can sit around and really think about my place in the world. So like if I when I left that place, it was a straight up impulsive decision. I don't know if all that stuff that you said that was very smart came into play like subconsciously,
Right,
I
right.
did, but I wasn't like, oh, do I even belong here? I
You
definitely
just saw it and you acted and you were like, you know what, I'm gone. This is not.
I am like I'll tell you this. I feel like the reason the hero's journey to bring it back to that is so powerful is because it's so real, right? Like you are in a place of stasis most of the time for period. And I think you could like hero's journeys come up all the time because for me, I was in DC. I think I'd been there for like 2 years. I was, this was at a time when there was not a lot of English speaking Latino journalists in DC, right? There's a lot of Spanish speaking Latino journalists who wrote for like La Opinión or La Prensa, like all
Sí.
these like old publications, but they were like frankly starting to die, right? Digital journalism was just starting to sort of take over. A lot of like Politico was just had just kind of started, and HuffPo was just kind of getting big. This was like this moment. It was this moment of transition that was happening in the journalism space, and I was approached by one of these big daily newspapers in the East Coast that happened to want like a Latino like they were like, we want Latinos, right? They recognized the Latino market was going to blow up.
Which is early. They saw it early.
Yeah. And they, and I think this has a lot to do with Obama because Obama was really courting Latino voters. Obama got elected on this big coalition, and we were a huge part of that coalition. And so it was it was starting to get reflected in like the mainstream media. And so this person who wants to hire me, this owner he owns this big paper that has a huge Latino readership and is in one of the big cities, one of the big East Coast cities. I won't say which one it is, but so he wants to hire me. And my mentor at the time was this beautiful, beautiful white man named Charlie Erickson, who was married to this little Oaxacan woman who fought for Chicano civil rights. He's like old school, one of the first like allies to really, really fight for specifically Chicano civil rights. And he was really well connected in DC, and he was the person who was really getting me all this work and really taking me to the White House. And he was my mentor. I was on this hero's journey, right? And it was like this guy wanted to hire me, and he invited me to breakfast for a quote unquote job interview. And Charlie and I went to this place, and it was like one of these, I don't know, like the fanciest hotel in town. I don't know what it is, but it was like, like the Waldorf Astoria, but in DC.
Yeah.
And we get there and he has me sit. He goes, go sit over there. And I have to sit and watch him and Charlie have breakfast. And they're talking about me, I guess. I don't know what's happening. After the breakfast, he calls me over for coffee. So then I get to sit with them and have coffee, where he tells me, I talked to Charlie. We think you're the guy. We've been wanting to do this. We think you're the one. Like, it's like we have this huge gamble. We're going to gamble. And Charlie's convinced me it's you. And he's like, tells me how much they're going to pay me. And it was a lot of money. And they were like, we're going to fly you down to Latin America just so you get trained so that your Spanish is like, you're going to be in Latin America for a little while, and you're going to like, just so that your Spanish is really sharp, because we want to start doing stories in both English and Spanish, all this stuff. And like, all I kept thinking about was the fact that he didn't let me have breakfast. That's all I kept thinking about, that he made me sit there and watch them eat when I was fucking starving, and I was poor as fuck. I put myself on the $5 a day footlong diet. Like in the morning, I'd buy a footlong from Subway. Back then, they were $5.
Right.
And I would split it. I would have a footlong in the morning and I have a footlong at night, and that's how I got through the year on like a $5,000 a month salary. Like I was making $5,000 a month in one of the most expensive cities in the world. Yeah, I mean, like $5,000 a month is like pretty decent if like the rent in DC like wasn't crazy.
It's nuts, man. Like going to work in DC, most people see it as a trampoline, build a network, and it's valid, 100% valid. You have to, work through it and, get up slowly, but in reality, there's only a handful of positions that are going to make a lot
of money. Yeah. I mean, I was struggling, and so I was really hungry. I thought I was going to get a free lunch. I mean, I lived off those free lunches and free like hors d'oeuvres they gave at all the DC political mixers. And so when he didn't let me have breakfast, he gave me this thing, and I was like, great, and like, you'll start in 2 weeks or whatever. I was like, cool. Like that day I got in my car and left, and that was it. Wow. So like so that was to me like from the moment
he disrespected you, dude.
I don't know if he did. I mean, he did what he was doing. Like, I'm sure this is what they do. Like, I'm sure this is part of the game. Like, I could have played the game. I don't know the game. I don't know play that game. So that's like a very like specific thing that happened. And so for me, I feel like I'm the guy that like there's these specific things that happen, these catalysts in my life that make me make these choices that sort of put me on these trajectories to where I am today. And I think like so I wasn't thinking about, oh, I don't want to go to Latin America and learn Spanish. My Spanish is fine. But I didn't think about that. I wasn't like, oh, am I going to be uncomfortable in the White House press poll because I'm like the one Mexican there and I went to community college. Like I don't have, an Ivy League education. I wasn't thinking of any of that shit. I was just like, fuck this guy.
Do you have like this other idea of what you wanted to do?
I don't think so. I don't, it's hard. It's hard. Like sometimes also like I'm sure I'm like retconning this shit so much, like, but because this is and the stories I tell are through my perspective, and my perspective is definitely biased. But I don't remember having a plan. I just remember not wanting to be there anymore very strongly. And I will say, like, I've grown up a lot. I try not to be as impulsive. I try to take a beat and not immediately react to things these days. Um, but like, I think when I was in my 20s, I don't know, there's that part of me that's like, I am really grateful and appreciative of the life I have and the things I've been able to do in my life. But there's also the things where I'm like, man, if I would have learned the game a little earlier, if I would have been like maybe I wouldn't have had to live in my car so much. Maybe I wouldn't have had to be so broke. And poverty in America is very violent. There's a part of me that's like, people say like, oh, I wouldn't have done it any other way. I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, maybe I would have. I don't know.
Some of your friends would be like, nah, dude, like, fuck it. No te arrepientas, dude. Like, it is what it is. That's life. I'm like, dude, if si no te arrepientes, there's no growth. Like, you need to find those specific moments and be like, nah, dude, like, I regret that. I shouldn't have done that. Because if there's no regret, there's no growth, man.
Like, leaving that, like, at that time, I really was an idealist. I really wanted to change the world. I thought I could do it through, like, writing about politics. And I really, like, the world really made me feel like there is no fairness, right? And that guy in that moment, he made me feel a thing. And my mentor, Charlie, was very disappointed in me. He was really still cool with me, but he was just like, "You're so talented. What are you doing? Whatever." I still left, and for a long time, I didn't believe. I didn't believe in anything. I was like a nihilist for a while, And I think I was just like sort of trying to find ways to make money, and like living like in that way of like, I'm gonna make money, I'm gonna make money. Like to have a plan, I didn't have a plan. I just wanted to make money, and I was like chasing this idea that like, if I make enough money, it doesn't matter like if the world sucks because I have like a shortcut or whatever. I have a defense mechanism against this world and I don't need to change it, And when I wound up living that life that way, that's what made me, broke and unhoused. Living that life that way of like nihilism and just chasing money and just being like the system's rigged. I'm not gonna do anything about it. Fuck it. That's not my job. Like that left me broke, unhoused, and unhappy, and like at the bottom. Like I fell to a very low point in my life. Like one of the things I decided to do was like, I'm gonna make a documentary. I'd make documentaries. I had done a lot of stuff. I was like, I'm just gonna make a documentary. I'm just gonna do it myself. I'm gonna make a documentary about tacos. Tacos are very popular. Like I was not thinking about anything other than maybe I could make some money and like get myself out of this hole I was in. And so I was like interviewing people about like stuff, and I decided to go interview Charlie because by then Charlie was retired and he was living in a retirement home in San Diego. And I drove down to interview Charlie about tacos, because he was like around LA in like the 60s and 70s, and I went to interview Charlie, and Charlie is like, Trump is president and Charlie's fucking pissed. And he's pissed at me because he's like, and he like, instead of answering my questions, he like looks at me and he goes, "What are you doing for la causa?" This is like
Wow.
yeah, and la causa is like the cause, like,
The people,
and
la
the
raza.
people, like la raza, yeah. And it's like, here's this old, like, retired white man in a wheelchair, like, telling me like I ain't doing shit, and it was like in that moment where I found I was able to sort of like reacquire that idealism that I thought I lost for
And how
good.
how long how long went by, from the moment that you took off to this conversation?
I want to say like 7 years, maybe.
Wow, it took a while.
Took a while,
And
yeah.
I wanted to ask you a question about, you mentioned that you were homeless for a minute there. And
Hmm.
so how do you transition from that, dude? Like and this is from that mentality and that space and that feeling, because I remember I listened to a conversation that you had. I think it was actually in the Out of the Shadows podcast or somewhere else, or I read it. You're talking about how you used to connect with one of your friends, Patty Rodriguez, and talk about different ideas, and how do you get back to it, Did you, when you were homeless, did you lose hope at any point when you're like, this is gonna be my future, or were you
Yeah, for sure. I think, I wasn't I was only unhoused for like there was a period of my life when I was unhoused by choice, when I was just living in my car, driving across
right?
the country, staying in hotels. This time was different because I felt like I had failed, and I was living in my car for like, I think like 3 or 4 weeks. And I was ashamed. My parents have always been great and supportive, and I could have easily immediately gone to them and been like, "Hey, I'm struggling. Like, can I borrow some money or can I come stay here?" But also, like, my parents were already like, there was a lot of people living at the house already. Like,
Hmm.
my brother was trying to save money to buy a house, so he was staying there with his whole family, like all three of his kids and his wife. And it was a lot of people, and I didn't want to burden my parents, and I also didn't want to admit this like huge defeat, and I was very ashamed. And like, my dad has always been able to sort of just read me, like, even though I've not been good, I was historically not good at being vulnerable.
Hmm.
He was really good at like, he's like, "Hey, so I talked to Benito, one of my cousins. We're gonna build a little casita in the backyard. We're
Wow.
gonna we're gonna take a shed. We're gonna take a shed and build a room for you." And because he knew I had lost my job.
What were you working at this? What job did you lose?
I was like their coordinating producer for some band. And things didn't work out. We got robbed a couple of
Wow.
times, like, so like things didn't work out, and there was like a couple of deals that fell through, and the band started to struggle, and they were also like frankly, they were also like, "You actually, you're like, you're bad for our image," was one of the things they told me, which is kind of funny. It was
Wow.
like, because I was like, like I said, like I'm a redheaded Mexican. They're like a Mexican banda, and
Oh, it was a Mexican. It was a banda.
banda ya banda, yeah.
Banda sinaloense de viento.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, so they and before that I was working on this documentary series, and that got canceled. So it was like I was like kind of going from like job loss to job loss to job loss, and I thought it was unique, but it was really happening to a lot of people my age during that time. Like, millennials were just struggling to keep work.
What year was this?
I think it was like 2017,
Okay.
2017. I think when my dad just built me a place, and he just asked me to come stay with him. So I never really had to, like, my parents, they got me out, and a friend of mine got me like this job working minimum wage in a warehouse. It was like one of those refrigerated warehouses. And that's when I was like also trying to do this documentary, and also talking to Patty and writing a screenplay with Patty. because we were just like, let's just write some shit. She was just like, let's just write something. Here's an idea, let's write it.
I remember at some point you mentioned that Patty had a big role in you becoming a writer.
Yeah, Patty. Oh man, I love Patty. Patty's like my sister. She's one of my. I mean, she's like my oldest friend. I've known her since I was a kid. I met Patty when I think I just turned 18. I was always kind of a smart kid, but I was never a good student. And I was also like, I always thought like I was gonna, like I said, I grew up in a rough neighborhood, and I was like a wannabe thug. I was like a wannabe little thug.
You wanted to?
Yeah, I mean, even though I was kind of like, um, didn't fit the profile or whatever and got beat up a lot and was not good at it. I was doing a lot of stuff that I shouldn't be doing, and then I did some really, really gangster shit, and I almost got sent away. But my dad, he settled with this person, so they wouldn't press charges or like do something worse to me.
Yeah.
And then he got me a job at J.C. Penney. The backstory is like one of my dad's best friends growing up was this guy was a narco. Like I remember he was just such a happy guy, but he was murdered like on our block, like down the street. I don't know if murder is the right word because I feel like that's a legal term, but he got into a shootout with the cops with an undercover DEA agent, and he was killed. It was one of my dad's best friends. But my dad took an active role in like really being there for his kids. And so one of his kids was a manager at JCPenney. He had grown up to be a manager at JCPenney. And so this guy got me a job. So my dad got me a job at JCPenney, and I go in there and I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. I was like trying to like do good because my dad was like, he just put his neck out on the line for me, and he was really disappointed in me. And Patty was working there. And, like I said, we were very young. We had just finished high school, I think.
That's where you met her?
At JCPenney, yeah. And she was at JCPenney, and Patty was like, she had big dreams, she had this huge, huge dreams I never had the like audacity to have myself. But what I would do is I would write a lot of like poetry on like the receipt paper because I was bored a lot at this job. Like I was selling women's shoes and men's shoes. Like it was like Al Bundy shit. And I was very like, emo, and like I would write these like poems about death and about like, like life, like my childhood, all these trauma, and I would just kind of write poetry. It was just like whatever. I would just write on the receipt paper and just like toss it. And so Patty found some of these, and she's like, "Who the hell is writing this?" And like found out it was me, and she was like, "Oh my God, you're a writer. You need to come with me to my journalism class." She was on the school newspaper at Cerritos College, and
wow.
And I was like, I'll do anything a beautiful woman says. So when she said, come to school with me, I was like, sure, like, let's go. And, I like went to class, and I was like, oh my God, people pay you to write? Like people pay you, this is a job. Like you could get paid to tell stories. And, so that's when I became a writer. I think maybe I was always a writer, but Patty is the reason she like saved my life. Like who knows what would have happened, and I think her and my dad in that moment really saved my life and really put me on this new trajectory.
When we first connected, it was through this news back in the day when you were going to start that project. And
oh yeah.
Yeah, and because I mentioned, to the team that I wanted to do stand-up comedy, right? And I've been holding on for a while because I didn't know if I wanted to do it or not. And so I ended up doing it. I've been doing it for over 2 years now. And one of my bits is specifically about what I'm going to ask, So there's a specific type of jobs that usually immigrant parents would like their children to have, And writing might not be one of those jobs. So when you told your parents that you wanted to be a writer, how did they react? Do like, or was there ever a conversation about it?
No, I don't think so. I think maybe I don't remember. I think my parents are not like they're like me. I don't think they have a lot of introspection, you know? I think they're like very impulsive, very like they're Sinaloenses. It's a very
Yeah.
Sinaloa thing to just kind of live life, and they were just kind of like happy I wasn't fucking up anymore. You know, I wasn't
Mm.
like wasting my potential anymore. They were just like, oh, good.
I want to ask too about like, your parents moving to the US. How that come to be, man?
Depends on who you ask. My mom, will tell me she really wanted us she really was trying to get better life. She had just had my brother, was 5 years older than me, and he was she wanted a better life for him, I think. And you know, my dad had gone through a lot of crazy experiences in Sinaloa, the narco culture, like the 80s, 70s and 80s is when like the Guadalajara cartel, which
Simon.
was the first big cartel, was starting to really rise, and the plazas were starting to get organized, and my dad got shot by a narco,
Shit.
and my dad wasn't even a narco. He was just kind of he was in college. He's like a college student, and I don't know. There's like all these like factors of like the the environment was starting to change here in the U.S. too, where prior to my parents coming to the U.S. to stay, like the borders were very fluid, and you could
Hmm.
come back and forth, and you could come work, make some money, go back to Mexico and live, come here, make some money, go back, and in at the end of the Vietnam War, um, the economy was really struggling here in the U.S. and in Mexico, and there was this sort of um, moment where the government here in the U.S. decided to close the borders and really start enforcing, creating border patrol, trying to build walls. And I think at that point, all the factors of what was happening in Mexico at the time, and it was my parents decided it was time to like really just come, and they put on their best hiking gear, and
Right.
they fucking crossed
They
the
went to
Cerro.
REI.
Yeah, they went to REI. They got their like hiking gear. They make sure they had canteens. I mean, they basically, yeah, they put on. My dad was in the military in Mexico, so he just put on his military boots and the jacket, and you know,
I love the dude, like children of immigrants and immigrants, man, like all the different lives that we get to live, like I don't know, you might be like in your 30s, early 30s, or around that age, and like all the different things that you've done, man, like you managed banda. I have to say, Eric, is my favorite type of music, man. Like I used to be a quebradita instructor, dude. Like it's
oh,
I fucking love banda. So that's awesome. But like I like to understand because you have all these projects, man. Like you have TV, podcasts, documentaries, like news writing, directing, producing. So how do you decide how to start a project? Like, do you work on multiple projects at the time, or are you approach, or do you work mainly on your ideas? How do you manage that?
it's a good question. I think so. In this later part of my career, I had done a bunch of stuff where I think I was just kind of uh, chasing my own tail, trying to make money early on. Like, I think um, reactive, and then when I sort of found my way again, and I decided I was only going to do projects that were good for my community. Like I really want to make the world a better place, like for real this time. And like my idealism is still there. It's tempered. There's a practicality to it. But I do feel like stories have a very powerful way of helping shift the culture. I think there's empirical evidence about it. Like there's studies, there's reports, and I want to be a part of
the transition, right?
Yeah, that transition, that transformation to make this world easier for people, to humanize my community. So when I do a project now, I really only want to do projects that are going to make the world a little bit better for my community. And I think one of the ways I decide to do a project is, do I feel this is a story about a person that maybe, or it's a story about a person or a time that has been either erased from history or has been maligned and marginalized and stereotyped. I think Chalino Sanchez is an example of somebody who, when I many times in trying to tell that story, which I tried to do for a long time before I actually got to do it. People were like, it's just another narco, who cares, right? Like, it's just another criminal, another thug, and I would always be like, yo, that could have been me. Like, that's my uncles, like that's my cousin, like, these are
right.
These are people with real lives, and like, to be able to humanize and give them the grace and dignity that I feel like every human deserves as like a right. So that's how I decide whether I'm going to do a project. I think projects can come to me sometimes, but I think the vast majority of stuff is stuff that I fight to get told, and
right.
I'm passionate about it. And in the world that I operate, like, number one is the other that's number one. Number two is that I want to tell our stories to a huge audience. Like, I want to, like, it's one thing to tell a story about Chalino Sanchez to people who know Chalino Sanchez is.
Exactly.
But for me, it was important to tell it so that people who had never heard of him would know who he was, or people who knew the story as like this, tragic criminal story could understand it was so much more than that. And so it's not about preaching to the choir. It's really about, I think, putting our stories into the mass media, into pop culture. And so those are the two factors that I decide. And because it's so hard to do that, it's a really difficult task right now. I try to only do things I'm really passionate about, because there's a lot of rejection, and even once you get the yes to make it, you're gonna have to fight to make sure it gets made in the way that you're comfortable with, where you're not like, you don't feel like you're selling out the culture. And so because it's so difficult, I really try to only do things that I'm really passionate about. But yeah, I think that's kind of how I decide. But I am working on multiple projects all the time, because you never know what's gonna actually get made, and what's actually or when something's gonna get made. And so I find it's important to like not give up on like your passion projects, not give up on those dreams, but also like don't make them everything. Like Chalino is a good example of something I was trying to tell for about 10 years. And
wow,
I didn't like obsessively like, this is the only thing I'm gonna, like, I'm not gonna do anything else. I was like, it was there, and I would try to get it made, but also at the same time I was making a bunch of other stuff, or I was developing other stuff. And you never know, again, where things are going to wind up and how things are going to get told. So I think it's important to always be developing ideas. And I've said it before, I take more shots than Kobe, like Kobe missed more shots than anyone in the history of the NBA. And he's still one of the greatest players that ever lived, still scored more points than anybody. And so it's like, for me, I'm not afraid to miss. Hopefully if I miss 1,000,000, I make 1,000,001.
Yeah. But how do you even begin to fail? Like, that's one of the big questions. Right? Like, I think a lot of the times when I postpone something that I want to do is because I don't even know how to fail. Like, how do you feel in producing a documentary, for example? How do you feel in producing Chalino? Like, what's the first step into that?
Well, I think it's important to really understand that even things that feel gigantic actually start with very small steps. And so, like, for example, the Chalino Sanchez story, I think the first attempt to like getting that story told was like I wanted to sell it as like a news story, like on the anniversary of his death. So the first step was like, oh, I'm gonna pitch this. I'm gonna email some editors and ask them if they'd be interested in this story. You know, like cold, like people that didn't even know who I was. I think that like because there's a way, like that's like you have to ask, you have to like shoot your shot. And so I think figuring out what that is for whatever project you're working on, for the podcast that we wound up doing, I think by that time I had just like the essays that I wanted to write about Chalino, I just wrote them for myself. You know, I wrote it down. I built a timeline of what had happened to him. I started researching. I started interviewing people, like in my capacity as a journalist or as my capacity working with bandas. Like I got to connect with a bunch of like people who knew him, who had worked with him, and I would just ask questions, and I would just do it. I would do it. I would start to build the story that I wanted to tell, because like again, shit feels impossible. Like impossible is like so, it's like one of those words that's actually the opposite of what it means. Like apart from like the physical world and the rules of physics, most things are not impossible. Most things are possible. That's the truth. The truth is there's an unlimited way for you to do the thing you think you can't do. Right? There's so many options. And I think that's what's really, if you really break it down and really get introspective, I think that's what's really holding most people back. It's like there's too many ways to start this, but all you got to do is pick one, you know? And it's like, all right, today I'm going to, you know, I'm going to write down everything I know about Chalino, you know, or I'm going to go buy some eggs and I'll figure out how to make a cake, you know, like there's so many different ways to start, and there's so many different ways to fail, and there's so many different ways to succeed. So I think when we start to feel like shit is overwhelming because I'm not going to be able to do it, the truth is it's like it's overwhelming because there's too many ways to do it. And you just have to start, I think. And I don't know if that answers your question, but it's like for me, I just go. Like I'm just like, let's go. Let's see what happens. But the other big thing, and this is one of the things I had to learn, which was like ask for help, you know. Yes. Ask people who have done it before. Like when I started getting into television, like I asked my friends who had worked in television, you know, and I asked people who knew, and like if I didn't know someone who worked in TV, I asked somebody who knew somebody who worked in TV. And like, you know, like for me, my friend Rafael Agustin was a big mentor. Like I had a lot of people. Like again, Patty was connecting me to people. Like, those are the things. Like Patty connected me to the people who would eventually help me make the Chalino podcast. You know, she's like, hey, I think the Chalino story is a great idea. I just found out this other person is looking for projects. Wanting you to meet, but like because I'm like working on it already, because I'm already taking the steps, like that's something that can like happen. It can't happen if you're not taking any steps.
You don't have anything to show.
Yeah, if you're just kind of like, oh, I have this idea, but I'm afraid to start it. Like, what can you do when somebody comes to you and is like, hey, like I would love to like work on something with you. Like if you don't have anything, it's harder, you know. And I think if we're waiting for like doors to open, like we're not going to be able to do anything. So I think that's been my strategy.
Dude, that's a huge takeaway advice, man. Like just do something. And when you ask for someone to work, you know, together, offer what to work on rather than, okay, let's shoot the shit and think about what to work on. Nah. Like if you're reaching out to someone, it's because you already have an idea of what you want and you have something to show for. Ya escucharon, raza. Pónganse las pinches pilas y no tengan miedo de empezar ese proyecto. Es que, ¿sabes qué, Eric? Nos pasa a todos, ¿no? Y tú estás mucho más avanzado en tu carrera, pero ese miedo de empezar, cabrón, dude, like, it's so true. Like, there is so many different ways to start. Like, it does overwhelm you. Desde la serie que estás haciendo con el Canelo, when is that coming out?
Hopefully we'll know more early next year. I think the strike, Hollywood has been on strike for a while, and I think that really held us back. But I'm very excited. I think a lot of people are excited. I don't know if you guys saw, but Canelo posted like a little AI Canelo animated teaser on his Instagram, which went like super viral. And I think that's like a good sign for what's going to happen. But I think, I think it'll be good. Like, I can't say too much, but we have some big, hopefully some big news early next year, January, February, to know what's going to happen, where it's going to land, and when it's going to be out. But we're still early stages. But I'm really excited. Canelo's so talented, so smart, and his story is going to inspire so many people. Amazing. His story is so inspirational. I
mean, like the rag to rich story, like I try not to push so much to people because it's not really realistic for most people, right? But like these really can happen to him. So I admire that. I'm excited for when that comes out, man. And like, I'll tell you a story about El Canelo, dude. Like, mi familia es más como, de Jalisco, but I used to spend time in Guadalajara when I used to go visit when I first moved to the U.S. And the first time I went back, I think it's like 2009 or 2010. And there's these tacos in Mexico, in Guadalajara, se llaman los tacos de cuernito. They literally sell tacos with the meat from the horn of the bull. They cook it. It's fucking bomb, let me tell you. But
sure,
I'm hanging around with my friends, like 3 or 4 of us, and El Canelo walks up to these like really small taco stand. Like he was young. He's like 21, 22. He's kind of my age. And there's like he has a detail with him, like un guardaespaldas, dude, like huge 6'2", dude, like mamado, dude. So he sits right next to us, man. And we're trying to play it cool, but we're giggling, like we're huge fans of this guy. Y me paro, like I was the biggest of all my friends, like, and I'm like, I approach Canelo. I don't even talk to the security. Like, I don't know what the situation here is. Like, what are you doing this, Yeah. And I touched Canelo on the shoulder. I'm like, hey, Canelo, una foto, ¿qué? But I didn't know I wasn't supposed to do that, dude. Like, this guy gets up of his chair. He's like, hey, you come through me and shit. Eventually, he finished eating. I did interrupt him, meet mordida. Like, he was, with the mouth open and shit. And then he came and we took a picture. But, like, I love the fact that he was just still, because Guadalajara is his home, he was just, like, driving around and, like, finding good spots to eat. Yeah, cool, man. Like, I admire that guy. So
I admire you because I went down to his gym like when he was training to fight Triple G for the 3rd time, and I was so intimidated. I didn't even want to go up to him, and I was like hired to go up to him. They took me there specifically to talk to him, and I was watching him like training and beating people up, and I was like, oh god, this is gonna fuck me up if I say the wrong thing, and I am not good at not saying the right thing, like I'm just like, I'm such a jokester. I was like, I don't want to fuck this up. He's gonna beat me up.
I think I did it because I was boxing at that time. I've been boxing for a little bit, and I remember like I saw him and I'm like, man, like I think I could do a couple rounds, because like he was small, but then obviously I'm fucking around Canelo. If you ever hear this.
I had seen him. Canelo's got like this really interesting way of training where he spars with guys who are like 4 times his size, all heavyweights, and so I'm just like, dang, that shit is crazy.
I've seen some of those reels and TikToks. That dude is no, I'm always a kid.
And I'm like, I would never last a round with the guy he's sparring with. Like, I don't know how I'm gonna last a round with Canelo, who's kicking this guy's ass.
I'm gonna text you the picture that we took. He's young.
Yeah, but Canelo started boxing when he was 15, so by 21 he was already like probably a seasoned veteran.
Oh, he was.
But yeah, man, I'm excited about Canelo Project. I think people are gonna love it.
Hermano, thank you so much, man, for making time. Honestly, I admire your work, and
thank you.
This is one of the coolest conversations I've had in a while.
Oh, thank you, Beto. Muchas gracias.
Va. Raza, muchas gracias por escuchar el episodio de esta semana. Ahí te encargo que nos dejes un review en Apple Podcasts y en Spotify. Ya sabes, síguenos en tu plataforma de podcast favorita o en YouTube para que te avisen cuando salga el siguiente episodio. Nos puedes contactar en @betorrizo_ o en @que-te-tomas- en Instagram y en Twitter. También nos puedes seguir en YouTube como @betorrizo o como que te tomas podcast. Music this week was by La Noche Oskura, LESFM, and from the Silverman Sound. This episode was produced and edited by me, Beto Rizzo. Photo and lighting was provided by Jean Reynoso, who you can follow on Instagram as @GeanR_photo. Yo soy Beto Rizzo, and you're listening to ¿Qué te tomas? Bye.